Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today because the college football playoff will not stop changing. There are tons of new reports coming out from tons of different sources, some very, very viable, about all of the different changes that are happening within those meetings. We will get to all of that. Then we're going to get into some breakout players for 2024. There are some under-the-radar guys that are either going to be forced to step into some big shoes, or I just feel like they're primed for a big breakout year, whether it's their sophomore or junior year. And then we were going to get into some possible 2025 head coaches. The head coaches in 2024 have been all over the place, tons of different openings. So I thought never too early to put some new names on your mind to possibly take those jobs this time next year, because tons is changing very quickly, and some of these guys could be within head coaching jobs within the next 365 days. So I want to update you on all of those guys. And then finally we have our new segment, Hot Take Thursday. Now, I am not necessarily a big hot take person, but I got a couple in the chamber that I am ready to give you, and we'll start with an absolute doozy tonight, so let's definitely stay tuned for that, but let's jump right in. Actually, before we jump right in, I do want to remind you all that we do get tons of questions throughout the show and people that would like to interact with us, so the best way to do that is to use the link at the bottom of your screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions come across my screen, and maybe we can have a fun little back and forth here. But let's jump right in, because there's tons to cover. College football playoff, as we talked about yesterday, agreed to a new formatting for 2024 and 2025, which would include 5 auto bids and 7 large bids. Now, a lot of this, as I talked about yesterday, is still pretty much up in the air, because the college football playoff has kind of showed their hand as sorts by showing that they'll change before the new rules have even started. So I'm not necessarily overly confident that beyond 2024 will have this format, just because I'm not overly confident of anything staying the same in this sport right now. But there were tons of changes throughout the last, even 24 hours in this story. They're sticking with the 5+7 format, but it did come out that during the discussions for what they were going to do for the college football playoff, this came out from Kurt Schultz, the Washington president, via Brett McMurphy, a great college football reporter, where apparently the SEC and the Big Ten came into those discussions wanting 4 auto bids each. So not just 4 auto bids between the two of them, which I think even some people would say is too much, but they wanted 4 auto bids for the SEC and 4 auto bids for the Big Ten. They wanted to essentially monopolize this 12-team playoff and leave 4 positions for the Big 12, the ACC, all of the Group of 5 schools, and Notre Dame, which is a huge piece of this, which I will get into in a little bit. Basically, they wanted to be the playoff, and it's hard to necessarily blame the people that are making these decisions for the SEC and the Big Ten. Obviously, you'd love for these people to leave this on the table and, let everyone have their fair shot and let everyone be in on the game, and that's what I'd love as well. But the reality is that's not the way that SEC and Big Ten commissioners and presidents think, or really should be thinking, right? I mean, in today's college football, nothing is guaranteed, even, 6 months from now. We learned that a year ago with the Pac-12. It just crumbled before our eyes before we even had a chance to really get our head around not having the Pac-12 in this world, and now it's the Pac-2. So there's so many different things going on in the sport. There's so much instability around the sport that every single conference has to worry about what's best for their conference, right? And especially these two, to be totally honest. I mean, you want you want the MAC, you want Conference USA, you want the Sun Belt to have more negotiating power here, have more have a bigger seat at the table, but the reality is the SEC and the Big Ten know that they're in a position of power. They know that them compared to even the Big Ten and the Big 12 and the SEC is a different ball game, right? So they are now in a position where they look at the college football landscape, they see the numbers, they see the viewership numbers, and they're thinking, we bring in the most revenue, we bring in the most fans, um, we have the most premier players, we play the best football, all of this different stuff. Why would we not dominate the postseason? Because there's a real argument to be made that most SEC teams are of the top 12 teams in the country. In fact, in the last, starting in 2024, going back in the 10 years, if you it was a 12-team playoff throughout the 10 years of the college football playoff from the get-go, it would be 7.6 playoff bids per year for the SEC and the Big Ten. So they would have dominated it. They would have had roughly 8 teams in a 12-team playoff from the get-go. And last season, it would have been 9 teams in the 12-team playoff between the Big Ten and the SEC if the rankings were as they were set up. So there's definitely an argument to be made. There's no two ways about that. The argument is absolutely to be made that the SEC and the Big Ten deserve to kind of flex their muscles, as it were, and deserve to kind of demand more in this space. It's the same thing that happens in professional sports. The teams that are winning championships, the teams that move the needle. The Chiefs get a lot of, I don't want to say in any big time decisions, but at the end of the day, when the NFL is thinking about making rule changes or thinking about who to put on national television or thinking about what differences they want to make in the game, the Chiefs are a team that come up immediately. The same way when the Warriors were successful in NBA, you had to think about the Warriors before you thought about some other teams, because the reality of this is it's entertainment, and it's a for-profit entertainment model. So you are in the business of making the most money for not only your conference, your teams, but for yourself in a lot of ways. And while that is a very frustrating thing to get your head around as a college football fan, because the reality of the sport is for a long time it felt cleaner than other sports. And whether or not that was true, I think, is massively up for debate. I tend to believe it was just as slimy and smarmy in the backdrops as the other sports, but it felt like the players were playing for something bigger than money. They were playing for the pride of the game. They were playing for the love of the university, whatever it was that initially drew college football fans, whoever you are, to this game. A lot of it is being kind of stripped away, whether that's through NIL or transfer portal. And now you will not find someone that is a bigger fan of NIL in college football space than me, to be totally honest, because it's insane that the players that bring in all this money don't get a fair share of the money that is brought into these universities and these conferences. But that's a topic for another day, and we can get into that. But another wrinkle to this that is just come out pretty recently is, over the next couple of days and even yesterday, the idea of a 14-team playoff was thrown out there. And I know the Big Ten commissioner, Tony Petitti, wants 16. So we are in a position where it started at 4, and then there were some people that said, well, TCU got left out in 2014, and they were an elite team, and then Florida State last year is a great example. It's got to be at least 6, or it's got to be at least 8. And then they just decided to jump to 12. And the second you jump to 12, the second you make that leap, the second you say, okay, we're willing to entirely change the fabric of not only the playoff, but the entire fabric of the entire postseason in college football, right? Because in a 12-team playoff, they're going to play quarterfinal games on the 20th and 21st of December. The 20 and 21st of December is right when bowl games get going. It's right when some teams that wouldn't get national television time get national television time. Teams like Western Michigan or Eastern Michigan or Western Kentucky, or you can go down the list. Texas State. Basically, you're taking an entire postseason for this one thing. And it's not to say that this isn't the most important part of the sport. Of course it is. Everyone wants to win a championship. Everyone wants to be in the playoff. Everyone wants to be a part of the big dance. There's no two ways about that. But the beauty of the sport lies in the Tuesday night MAC games between Miami of Ohio and Buffalo. It falls in the bowl games between Western Kentucky and App State or whoever. The beauty of the sport is not with the top teams, and maybe some people disagree with me on that, and I'm more than happy to go back and forth with you on that, but the beauty of the sport is that we have these other teams. We have these differing styles. We have these changes in the way that people play and the way that they have to play, given, whether it's talent level or just facility ability, the money that you have. Everyone has to play different games. Throughout the history of the sport, everyone has had to play a different game because everyone has different circumstances. Now, all of those circumstances are kind of coming to a head. All of the power that the SEC and the Big Ten have are coming to a head, and they are fully wielding it to, I don't want to say hijack, but let's just say kind of make the playoff their own. And to be totally honest, I'm a little tired of all of this. Not to say I love talking about college football. I love getting into every nook and cranny of the sport because this sport has so many different things that go into it that make it awesome. This is not part of the sport that I enjoy talking about too much. And now it's a huge part of the sport, and I will absolutely continue to talk about it because it affects everything else, right? It affects pretty much every team in the country is affected by what's going on in Texas throughout these discussions. But the reality is I like talking about football, and all of the stuff that has been going on around college football, whether it's conference realignment or playoff expansion or NIL, transfer portal, all of this stuff has taken away from what this sport is about, which is the football games on the field. And it's the same thing I talked about a couple of days ago when we were talking about the schedule. In December, 90% of the football or college football stuff I see is about recruiting. It's about the transfer portal. It's about people bouncing around to different jobs. It's not about the bowl games that are coming up or the bowl games that are being played, and it's a very frustrating thing. And I think it's all kind of come to a head to this big moment where the SEC and the Big Ten see that we're in a state of change. They see that college football is changing all the time and is morphing before their eyes, and they see that they have the most chips in front of them. Point blank period. The Big Ten and the SEC hold the most power in this sport, along with TV executives that you don't know or I don't know the name of, which is a very fun little wrinkle to this sport. But all of this, all of the playoff expansion, all of the conference realignment, all of the craziness that has gone on in our sport was avoidable. And this is kind of more an opinion based, so I'm going off on a little bit of a diatribe here, but we always knew that college football has a gap in it. We know now, especially, the gap is just growing and growing and growing. Get to the end. Get to the point where we can say, okay, this is what we have. At least we have the structure. At least we know what the structure is going forward. Because right now, I don't know if the SEC is going to have 20 teams in 2 years, or they could have 24 teams. There's so much up in the air that I don't even know who the Georgia Bulldogs will be playing in 2 years. When in the past days, you knew they were going to play Georgia Tech, you knew they were going to Auburn, you knew they were going to Florida, and these games meant something because of that, right? Now with all of this stuff bouncing around, with all of these different teams going different places and not getting the games we're used to, we're losing a lot of what made this sport magical. And I think the best way to do this and the best way to get through this mess that could have been avoided, some people will tell you differently. Some people will say, our hands were tied, that the sport was changing too quickly. It wasn't. There was an ability for the right people to be in the room and to make the right decisions about NIL and the transfer portal and conference realignment and make all of this, at the very least, much more streamlined. I don't think there was any reality where we're going to avoid this craziness, but make it more streamlined, because at this point, I just want to get back to talking about football. I want to get back to talking about the matchups that we're going to see year after year. I want to, maybe Notre Dame has to join a conference. That's fine. Maybe the SEC and the Big Ten have to break off, and then you have a tiered college football system that don't play each other. Whatever. I don't love it. That's the thing. I don't love a lot of things that are going on in college football. But get to the end result, because there are college football fans every single day that you are losing because you won't just tell people what's going to happen. You won't just get in a room and actually hash this out, because if you had the right people in the room, and if you had more people, if you had people that actually cared about the sport, if you had people that actually understood what fans of college football are going through right now in that room, this decision could be made relatively quickly. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape, I get that, but all of that is done away with if they want it to be done away with, right? So, but I guess overarching, all of this is a mess, and they know it's a mess. They're trying their best, I suppose, to figure out what's the best course of action going forward. My overall take is just get there. Get to that point. Get to the end result and let us figure out if we like it or not. Because you're going to get there anyway. You're going to pull that trigger at some point where there's two totally different leagues and the SEC and the Big Ten are playing a totally different game. Get there faster. Because we want to see not only what these conferences are like, but can we get emotionally attached to the new matchups that we're going to see? So I'll leave it at that. I've been a little bit long-winded here. It's been a lot of emotion around this, because a lot of this really frustrates me, I'll be totally honest. There is not a lot of redeemable qualities I've been able to see in this mess that we've seen, but just get to the point where we have a structure, we know what we're doing, and we move forward with confidence for at least a decade. Just give us a second to breathe before someone else moves and someone else jumps. So I guess just get it moving. If you're going to do it, get it moving. And if you're not going to do it, then figure out what the best plan is and set it and then move. Because it's really frustrating to watch the sport that was so specific and so tried their best to be regional, and you played the teams that you played, has now become an absolute mess, an absolute, all over the place with so many different respects that reel it in. Make it make sense to all college football fans, and then you can let the chips fall where they may, because you're going to lose some fans, but the reality is at least you'll know the structure going forward so fans can make that decision. But I'll leave it at that, because I've been a little bit long-winded here. It's a very frustrating topic for me, but when we come back, we're going to talk about something a little bit lighter about the sport. We're going to talk about some breakout candidates for 2024. There are tons of guys that are going to have to step into huge shoes in 2024, and I think there are some guys that are more than capable of doing that and doing that to the highest degree. So we are going to take a short break, and we will be right back.